Hello, everybody. Good evening. This is Marco Magalhães talking to you from Toronto, Canada. And today we're going to continue to study Evolution in Two Worlds. And we're going to be talking about the chapter number 3 of the second part of the book, which we'll be talking about the spiritual body and volitation. So first of all, thank you all for being here with us tonight. I'm very happy to be here working with Vanessa and the Kardec Radio people to bring you this incredibly interesting book and share some information that you might we might have a very nice discussion about this book. So as you all know from this point now that we've been studying this book for so many days, at the first look, this might appear to you as a challenging topic, a challenging book, and you're not alone. The very first time this book was published, there was a lot of discussion about the content of the book, the scientific aspects that were brought in. And it took us a long time to really understand that in reality, the book is actually very straightforward when it explains some very challenging topics, bringing you in context what we know in the spiritual world and what we know about the science of all things. Similar to what you see in Genesis, for example. If you look at the book Genesis by Allan Kardec, we also see a very similar idea where you have a perfect in-tune combination of the science and the spiritual knowledge that underlies everything. So welcome to all of you guys. Vanessa is here already saying, "Go Marco." Thanks, Vanessa. and all our friends. I see, hello everyone. And we're going to now start talking about the book specifically. Okay. So if you look carefully here, I'm going to start with, if you look at the book, Evolution to Worlds, we're going to start now going through some more details on the book. And before we go ahead, I know probably you all know about this, but since some of you might be joining for the first time, so we're going to talk a little bit about the spiritual body. And I have two sentences here that are quite interesting and may summarize a lot of what we're going to mention today. So the first one by Paul in the letter to Corinthians, if you read it with me, that's what he's going to say, that, "Do you know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? Therefore, honor God with your body." Needless to say that there's a lot of information there. We can have an entire hour just discussing, our creation and who we are as a spiritual body, as a body, and as a spirit. But importantly, this reminds us of what we're going to be talking about today, that the bare spiritual body is part of our existence, of who we are. And it is this major connection between our physical form or physical body and who we are, which essentially is ourselves as spirits. And André Luiz summarized it really, really well in the book Conduta Espírita. It says, "The body is the first loan received by the incarnated spirit." Yeah. So it is a loan of unimaginable importance, because it allows us to learn, to live on this planet, and any planet for that matter. And if you read the book, the Spirits book, there's many sections that talk specifically about the spiritual body, and I'll just read you one question here. The question number 93, Allan Kardec talks specifically about the perispiritual body, and this is the first question that is related to this particular topic. So Allan Kardec is going to ask the spirits, and I'll just read for you guys. "Is the spirit per se without a covering, or as some insist, is surrounded by some kind of substance?" Very interesting question. So the spirits will answer, the spirit is surrounded by a substance that might look like vaporous to you, like a vapor, right? Like, when you boil water, you see some vapor around. So there's no specific uh, uh, um, matter look to it, but it is some type of hybrid material that we can't really define. Um, but which is still quite dense to us. So the spirits are telling us, well, for your perspective, the perispiritual body is invisible. For us, it's actually quite noticeable, quite dense. Nevertheless, it is sufficiently vaporous to be able to raise itself up the atmosphere and travel to wherever it wants to go. Now, why is that so important? Because today we're going to be talking about volitation. And this is the ability that the spirit has to, as the literal translation of this will be, is to take flight, right? And we're going to go back to the spirit's book in a minute. So there's a lot in the spirit's book that we need to talk about today, because it is indeed very, very, very important. Okay, so going back now to the book that we're studying today, before I go along here, start talking give you another lecture about, the spirit and the spirit's book. Let us go back to the evolution in two worlds. Yeah. So, evolution in two worlds, the very first thing that we're going to be talking about today is volitation. Volitation as the act or power or ability to take flight. Now, this is something that many of us will probably think, well, it's challenging to understand, because it means that a lot of the rules that are stuck in our brain about physics are only applied to physics of matter. When we're talking about elements that are unknown to our understanding of science or matter, like elements that are not in our periodic table, then the law of physics get a little bit complicated. They can't be applied that well. And here's why volitation is important, because the perispiritual body is obviously not made of the same type of matter that our physical body is. Therefore, it really doesn't apply necessarily to the same laws that govern matter itself. It does, but in a very different way. So how does the law of gravity affect our perispiritual body? Certainly it affects in a very different way from our physical body. Therefore, the perispiritual body that surrounds the spirit, as we described in the first question in the Spirit's book, has the ability to move in ways that we cannot even imagine. And that's what Andrea Luiz explains to us. Now, if you ask me now, Marco, can you tell me like in details what's going on? That's difficult, because even to when Andrea Luiz was um, when we were talking about the book today, and if you look at the what Chico was as a medium was writing for us, they will say that it's hard for us to understand, very difficult for us to understand, and sometimes it will take a long time for us to understand in more detail. But obviously, there is a message here that makes it much easier for us to understand. And I think that's part of the magic of this book, is that there's always a way for us to digest some very difficult concepts. And what we're given here on this chapter is comparison the information that we have in the book to metamorphosis. And I think that's one of the most amazing images that we can possibly correlate with everything that we're talking about today. And the reason why, if you look at the process of metamorphosis, it's just a massive transformation um, of a body, right? So, for example, we have that in insects, where we have what we call a full or complete metamorphosis, and we have that in many other insects. Many other animals can go through the same process, which is a significant or substantial difference between the different stages of life. That does not happen in high archy animals like us humans, but it does happen in many different levels in nature. The most well-known example of that, obviously, is the butterfly, and we'll bring that to discuss today. So, as you see here in the slide, so everything starts with a little egg form, which contains this principle of life embedded into it. Now, why is that important, Marco? Let's go back to it. Because think about it for a second. The same way we learn from Jesus about the seed of the mustard tree, that contains everything needed to generate this incredible living system, which is the tree of the mustard. Everything is contained there, just think about it. So this is exactly how we're created. Now, if everything is contained in that small little seed, it means that we are capable of transforming ourselves in any ways, in ways that we cannot even think about. And it's very important because transformation is part of our lives, right? Just think about it for a second. Bring it back to your own lives now. What is the goal of our existences? I know a lot of difficult questions today, but are we here to evolve? So if we are created, if we think about the process of metamorphosis or the creation of, of life based on seeds of a plant, it means that that seed is within us. We have everything we need. There's no question about it. Um, so considering that example, and I go back to the metamorphosis here, so that little egg will transform itself in a larva, which obviously looks very different from a butterfly. And if you think about our physical bodies as being a larvae, it makes it much easier to understand. Think about this. For a caterpillar, which was what we call the larva of a butterfly, life is all about eating a lot of leaves and preparing itself for major transformation. Would if you're a caterpillar, have you ever thought about flying to miles and miles away? Think about how many butterflies travel the whole continent to continue their existences, right? So we are in our physical bodies here right now at the stage of the caterpillar. We're preparing ourselves. We're getting there. When we're finally ready, and we continue this evolution, and we, in the process of discarnation, then our physical body is now returned. All the elements of the physical body return onto the planet as everything is, and then our perispiritual body, or spiritual body, or perispirit, is now the only interconnection between our spirit and where we are living. We're able to change completely the way we interact with the universe. It's got more difficult now. Think about this. So our perispiritual body, or spiritual body, is actually what connects the spirit with matter. So in other words, if we're feeling something, if we're seeing something, it means that our eyes, our noses, our physical body systems are connecting to the perispiritual body, and that message is channeled through our spirit, which can detect those inputs when we are incarnated. When we disincarnate, the barrier of the physical body is gone, which means that every single piece of your perispirit or spiritual body is now directly connected with the universe and can feel and experience things in a completely different way. So everything changes. We're still the same. We're still the same. As a spirit, we're exactly the same, but the way we interact with the universe is completely different. And that's where the transformation of the insect to the metamorphosis is a great example of that, because the butterfly will take flights that were never imagined by the previous life cycle of that same animal. And that's exactly where we are, right? Now, let's think about a moment about what the description of metamorphosis that we have in the book that says this. During insect metamorphosis, the histolysis, histo means tissue, lysis is breakdown. So it's a breakdown of the tissues, and that's exactly what happens. The caterpillar digests itself. That's incredible. Uh-huh. So it means that the caterpillar is transforming itself with its own matter, its own capabilities, its own enzymes, its own hormones. It's all planned and prepared and organized in this incredibly perfect sync. So everything goes well and it transforms into a different form of life. What about us? How many times we have to go to the same lysis of the mistakes, of the thoughts that can't, they're still roaming around us? Like how many times we have to really go through cycles of lysis and resurrection and reformation and transformation of who we are so we can learn. Have you ever thought about this? How many times we came to this planet and incarnated into experiences that we go through this catharsis of the existence and we get out of it as a different person? Isn't that true? As a spirit, we're the same. But who we are as our existences, it's very different, right? And then this histolysis, going back to the slide now, that affects the muscles and the digestive systems, and it's greatly affected. But then the nervous system and circulation and all the essential systems are preserved, or they're slightly affected. And that's exactly what happened with us. So there's no mystery here. So when this carnation happens and our spiritual and our spiritual body now is disconnected completely from the physical body, the systems that connect the spiritual body to the spirit are all preserved. Who we are as thoughts, like we are our living representation of our thoughts around us, they're still preserved. None of that changes. What really changes is what we need to live in this new environment. So why would you think that a butterfly needs to fly? I thought about that. It's not by chance, I can tell you that. A lot of things we learn so far, not only in spiritism, that nothing really happens by chance. So the butterfly needs that particular type of adult life to find new environments, to lay eggs in different places, to go find flowers and different resources that will be important for the existence. Same thing for us, it doesn't change. So when we're in our spiritual lives and our spiritual body is now disconnected from the physical body, we may not need the same digestive system that we needed. Why? Because we don't need that type of resource of energy recycling to keep our bodies going, right? And so forth, till those things will certainly change, right? And that's the transformation that we see in the spirit and when discarnation. Now, and if you think if you continue going now through, I'm just going through the text now as you see here. So after the transfiguration occurred at death, and that's what we're talking about, the individuality resurfaces, right? Because we as spirits continue to exist in the same way, but natural changes in the muscular mass and digestive system, with little changes in the general constitution of the body. So how different is our spiritual body from our physical body? That's a very good question, and we have to go through different books to go and find more answers. So the first interesting question that I have for you guys is that, do you think the spiritual body is contained physically inside the physical body? That was also asked, and that's also asked by Allan Kardec in Spirit's book. And the question is simple. The spiritual body has no particular shape and restrictions on where it is and how it expands. And the expansion of the physical body, the spirit or the spiritual body, is that part of how we interact with the universe, of mediumship, we interact with other spirits, right? So the idea that we had before is that, when we look at a physical body and we think that everything is contained in there is a little bit wrong, because in the reality, we are a collection of things. We are our thoughts that are surrounding us all the time. When someone looks at you from the spiritual world, they're seeing what you're thinking. They're seeing how your spiritual body is shining, is vibrating. They're looking at who we are for real. And that is not contained by our physical body. right? So this changes suit the individual with different acquisitions for the new field of balance to which it's transferred. And that is the reality when we are discriminated and we are living in the spiritual world now without the same type of connection to the physical world anymore. Things are different. So we may not need the same type of systems that we needed here, right? We talked about, for example, we talked about eating, right? Last chapter was all about that. So we talked about the interactions with the spiritual body and the universe and what surrounds us. So everything changes. So the next question that I have in this chapter is this: so the individual now has possibilities of transportation and movement actually never thought before. And if you read Andrea Luiz books, or you can go to any of Andrea Luiz books, you find very interesting findings that in the beginning may be a little bit difficult to understand, but now I think we're getting to a point that we understand a tiny little bit more. For example, a lot of questions that I have, for example, is that, why do you need buses in El Solar? Like, why do you need some type of mode of transportation if a spirit technically can move around, right? Not constricted by the body anymore. So, as we understand, the perispirit or the spiritual body being this semi-material type of form of elements that can have the ability of move around, then why do we need that? And the answer is within us. We as spirits, we're still stuck onto a lot of ideas. That takes a long time and many incarnations and a lot of long time of evolution for us to understand better. So the reality is, the higher the spirits, the easier it is for them to move around the universe. Because the less materialized they are. So the equation is simple. You have more matter, you're denser, hard to move. And that's science telling us. It's actually Spiritism is just using that same scientific information to make it easier for us to understand, right? So let's take that same information now and think about, who we are as individuals. So the more you are surrounded by negative thoughts, surrounded by this low energies and thinking about mistakes and vengeance and your selfishness, and the more you're surrounded by that, the denser it is your type of vibration, because your vibration is a low vibration now, and certainly your perispiritual body or spiritual body is now a lot more dense and connected to matter. Makes it harder for you to move, and that will show up clearly in the spiritual world, right? So what is a spiritual body made of then, right? The question, we can go back to the Spirit's book, and I'll go back to the Spirit's book to answer that. The question number 94, Allan Kardec will ask this. So where does the spirit get the semi-material envelope, right? Or the spiritual body? From each globe's own universal fluid. So if you live on Earth, the elements that are part of our spiritual body are from Earth. And that makes sense because this is a type of semi-material, but it's still material. It is a connection between the spirit, which is not in a material form, right? It's the spirit, and the universe that surrounds it, which is material. That is why the perispirit is not the same on all worlds, and that makes a lot of sense. Now, when we're thinking about NASA going to other planets trying to find life, what are we trying to find? We're trying to find the same type of organic life and same type of perispirit constitution that we have here on Earth, and that's going to be very hard to find. So the lighter it is, the more evolved it is, the planet, the lighter or more immaterial is the perispirit, and the spirits obviously are going to be harder for us to see, even in the spiritual form. So in passing from one world to another, and believe me, we've been through a lot of worlds, We are transitioning now word of regeneration, which is fantastic, which means that we've been around for a long time. I can tell you that part. Spirits can change their envelope just as you change your clothes. Ha! There you go. So now go back to our own existences now. If we can change our envelope just like we're changing clothes, depends on where we are. In the end, there's one thing that we are not changing that fast, which is who we are as spirits. So if we were just able to change our thoughts in our minds and align ourselves with the divine laws as fast as we could change our prayer spirit, wow, evolution would be much faster. But as we all know, we need to learn a lot. That's not bad. We're learning. The fact that you're here right now, listen to this live with me, means that we've been a long way, and we've probably been a long way together. It means that I'm not here because I'm better. The contrary, I'm here because I probably did a lot of things wrong and I really need to work hard this time, and I'm giving this chance to try to make it better. And if I can warn yourself, anyone, that, well, let's evolve. Let's transform our thoughts. Let's change. Just like we can change our prayer spirits. So we can move the ladder of evolution a little bit faster. Right? And that's exactly what the message is here bringing to us. So Andrea Luiz is talking about volitation, but in the end, he's talking about free will and freedom and evolution. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the fact that we can fly higher and we can reach higher than everything imaginable to us today. And we can do that at any time. It really depends on us as a spirit. So let's get there, right? That's the deal. Let's do that. Okay. So, and there are more questions here that we're going to address in this particular chapter. And the next one is this. So, how can we understand the individualized and active mind? So, that's what we are as a spirit. If the cells in the spiritual body are as living as the ones in the physical one. And this is an amazing topic because now we need to go back to this same book and go to the first chapters on part 1 of the book that talks about life as a spirit and the spiritual body and the evolution of the spiritual body. And interestingly, if you think about our body, so our bodies is composed of billions of little engines, little vital systems that are independent of us. So they can't live without us, right? So, for example, we have cell lines that we can grow in plastic, and the cells grow quite nicely if you give them the right combination of nutrients. And that's what I do in my research. But interestingly enough, if you grow them individually in a piece of plastic in a petri dish, they behave a little bit different than what they are in the body. That's quite obvious, right? Because the body has a central regulatory system that controls everything, and that is us as a spirit. Our mind, our thoughts, that's the motor, that's the central connection of everything. How Teixeira gave an example, interesting example one day. He talks about us as being like the city where there's a water distribution system, and the water is all retained, obviously in the higher ground, and that from the higher ground, the water is distributed through all the pipes to all the little houses, and we all drink from it. So there is a type of central distribution system which controls individually every single component of that body. And not only that, we have hormones, we have all communication systems that ensure that every single bit of our body is working. Now, think about a company. So a company has a CEO that makes the decisions, and there's a group of directors that controls managers, and the managers talk about team leaders, and team leaders talk to individuals who make things work. So our body is not different from that. It's just that it's much more organized and complex than any possible company that you can imagine. Sometimes it fails too, and it fails. And there's another lecture of why sometimes things start to collapse. But in general, And as we can see here on the description by Andrea Luiz, it is a matter of perspective, as it happens a large-scale factory or company in which management united in its programs of action, right, which is right here. That's our program of action, supervises, commands hundreds of little machines, and each with several different apparatuses, and unites all parts for a specific purpose. Now, the interesting lesson here is that the fact that our spiritual body also has the same type of engineering or mechanics is very interesting, because what tells us is then the connection between the perispiritual, the spiritual body, the perispiritual, the spiritual body, to our physical body is done on a cell-by-cell basis. They are a matching pair of each other. They're all completely interconnected, and they talk to each other very, very well. Also interesting, because if you think about the same example of the factory, if a particular system is not functional for any reason, or maybe because you smoke too much or drink too much and you damage specific organs, that damage will be directly translated into the spiritual body. And the spiritual body then will carry that damage. And that damage will take a long time for it to be repaired, because you have to come back. And then when you come back, that damage will be cleansed through your new body. Interesting, because now we're talking about health and disease. And the title of the chapter is Volitation. I know. This is a typical Andrea Luiz book. There's a lot there. There's a lot there that connects to our lives. Also makes you think about, if we're really this very complex system where it's like a little, a little large-scale factory or company that has some type of central command that distributes itself, like a distribution center that goes around the world, then obviously, if whoever's in command, in our case, we, as a spirit, is not functioning well, there's a very good chance that the factory is not going to be that productive. In other words, we're going to waste a lot of time, because our bodies will respond to exactly what we command. Okay, now we're probably thinking, Marco, you're just going completely out of this world now. But the reality is very simple. What are you thinking? Think about it right now. I just want you to take a deep breath, and what's going through your mind? Whichever going through your mind right now, except what we're talking about the book, but except we're going through, look at what you're thinking right now, that's exactly the type of message that you're vibrating through every single one of your cells. And then if one of those cells starts to show off some stress and fails, whose fault is that? Is that the line worker that missed something? Or is it the company had that never thought about giving more time for that line worker to do his duties, right? That's exactly the same thing in our body. So Andrea Luiz gives us another perfect example on how we can learn about these things, right? So yes, we control every single one of our cells, not only in the physical body, but also in the spiritual body. Therefore, when we're out there in the spiritual body, in the spiritual world, we can also influence our spiritual body. And we can certainly change it in a positive or in a negative way. And we're going to talk about this now in a little bit more detail. So let's go to the next question. So now, if you go to the question, the third question that is asked on this particular chapter. So what are the mechanisms of alteration of color, density, form, movement, ubiquity regarding the spiritual body? Now, that's a very complex question, because there's like 6 questions in one. And obviously, Andrea Luiz is going to answer in an interesting way. So, to answer such a meticulously formulated question, and that is true, with certainty we'll need to determine more advanced knowledge on Earth in regard to the mechanism of thought. Interestingly enough, it looks like he's not answering, but the reality is that he's answering really, really well. Because the answer is highlighted there in the very last sentence, is that the mechanisms of our thoughts. Well, so every single cell of our body is connected and commanded by a very complex mechanism that comes from our spirit through our brains. And the spiritual body is the same thing. So, but what controls the spiritual body? Listen, we don't have a brain in the spiritual body necessarily the same way we have in the physical body. So there has to be some type of other commanding system. And I can tell you, because the answer is there, is that our thoughts are the commanding system for a perispirit or a spiritual body. Therefore, what we think, our perispirit or spiritual body can also change. So depending on what we're thinking or vibrating or which existence we're thinking about, let's say, I have imprinted in my memory this particular existence that somehow resurfaces in my thoughts every time I discarnate. That's one of my 3 or 4 existences ago. There's a good chance that when I discarnate, I'll start to show my spiritual body the same way I was 3 or 4 times ago. But I can change it. I can change clothes. I can change shape, or size, or pattern, because the type of matter that restricts our body here incarnated, they don't exist anymore in the spiritual world. So technically, our thoughts can control 100% of the machinery directly. So they can change. But as Andrea Luiz explains to us, we need to learn more about the mechanism of our thoughts. And I think that's another lecture. But we'll talk about it. We'll think about it. We'll get there. Again, I promise you, thoughts are really the theme of the day. So let's look at, which conditions will the spiritual body of a discarnated spirit suffer compression, excoriation, and injuries? Oh, wow, that's a very good question, right? So comparing and contrasting physical body and spiritual body, well, we know that physical body, we can get hurt, and we know exactly how we get hurt, right? It's an accident, right? That's what you're saying, right? No. We usually get hurt because our lack of diligence, of attention, understanding, patience, love, or charity, our focus on our own self-centric view of the world. That's how we get hurt, usually. You want an example? I'll give you an example. So an individual, after many years of life, is let's say he's driving a car and is thinking about their own personal problems and forgets to look at the speed and then crashes the car. Right? It's an accident. What exactly caused the accident? Oh, it's not the car or the self-driving system that now they put in the car, but likely the fact that there was some type of fixed idea in someone's mind that really caused some damage to the ability of that individual to concentrate on something that's quite trivial, which is drive. Now, this is a very straightforward and easy example, but now let's go into a very complex scenario where we have family constellations and relationships and many existences. Now, put all that in one bag. How complex is that? And then when our bodies get hurt for any reason, there's a very good chance that that type of injury was already imprinted in our perispirit or spiritual body. And this is exactly what Andrea Luiz is saying here, that in its relativity, or in other words, in relation to the existences of the bodies, this will happen the same way the physical body is injured in any way on earth. Remember that we are in the driving seat. So if you're in the driving seat, we're responsible for taking care of it, both the physical world and in the perispirit or the spiritual body. So there's no appropriate terminology then, and Darley is very clear about this. So we're not really trying to reinvent terms and names to describe things in different ways. We're not even close to understanding that in good terms. But there's no terminology on Earth to type of describe such a sophisticated matter. And certainly I'm not there to describe it. I have no idea how to describe it. As long as I'll take it that is some type of semi-material, a type of existence that is hard to describe in our terms. But the reality is that, bottom line for us, it doesn't matter if you know or not what's exactly constituents of the spiritual body. What matters is that the same type of actions that generates a type of reaction that will damage your physical body will likely damage your spiritual body too. And that's enough for us to think for a long time, right? Uh, let's think about other examples from Andrea Luiz. I think about the individual. Let's go back to between heaven and earth and look at an example of the spirit that uh, poisoned himself, right? Caused extensive damage to the larynx or to the throat. And that extensive damage that caused to the throat was obviously imprinted directly on the spiritual body because they're connected in a cell-to-cell or direct connection between them. So that damage, exactly the same damage that was caused deliberately by that action, was also um, imprinted on the spiritual body, and it's also damaged the same way. And now coming back to another existence, that will show itself. Because for every action, there's a reaction, and we know that. That's exactly what he's saying here. Does it matter if you know exactly what type of tissue is designed on the spiritual body? No. Does it matter? What matters is you know how to take care of it. And that's what we're doing today. I'm not saying that I'm an expert on it. I'm not, far from it, right? But at least we have some knowledge. Let's see what we're going through next. So number 5 now. Let's go to the 5th point raised on this chapter. In what order does the formation of the vital centers happen in the spiritual body of the intelligent principle? Now we're introducing another topic that was obviously explained before in the same study, but it's always good to go back. So what is a vital center? Vital center is one of the spots or the areas of the body where there is a direct connection from the energy that surrounds the spiritual body to specific plexus or organs in the physical body that generates this type of flux of energy that can be visualized because it concentrated as a fulcrum in one specific spot. For example, if you think about the coronal center, which lies right on top of your head and connects the pineal gland, and the pineal gland, as even the charts thought about as being the seat or the anchor of the soul, and that's what we know. It's one of the higher connections to the body that transmits the type of message to our own endocrine system that will again relates energy and information to all of the body. So these are specific spots of connection and energetic connections between our physical body and our spiritual body. So these vital centers are very important because they connect to key controlling centers in our physical body. For example, in the heart, in the larynx, in the stomach, the gastric center, and the sexual, the sexual energy on in the center too. So there's a lot of areas of connection that are very well recognized and studied. Now, the question here is like, what is the order that this formation is made? What is the sequence of events, right? Now, and here what Andrea is explaining to us that we know that the formation of the vital centers began with the first manifestation of plasma kinesis in the cell. So plasma kinesis is the ability of an entity or individual or a cell in this case to manipulate the plasma or its own field of energy under the orientation of the superior intelligence. Right? So that's the way we mold, we imprint shapes and forms to some type of energy. However, there are no technical particularities to describe this as ontogenic science. So, in other words, he's saying there's no particular stepwise approach to determine what exactly happens in that sequence. But what is most important here, that I think is the takeaway message from this, is that the vital centers, and that's explained here, as the first manifestations of plasma kinesis, so the very first formation of complex individuals like we are in our bodies today, they also are tightly tangled with the formation of vital centers. This sounds complicated, but it's quite obvious. Just think about this, right? So if you go back in evolution, in a single cell life form of bacteria, for example, there's really no way you think about a vital center because there's only the plasma surrounding the vital principle around that one cell that is giving life to that specific organism. So by the time we have multiple cells coexisting together, then you start to define roles to every one of those cell populations. So every body that has this complex multicellular system will eventually generate specific areas where the energy concentrates more or less depending on its function. So in a hierarchy bodies like ours, which are able to host this incredible being, which is ourselves, which is a spirit, then there are very complex vital centers that are connected to specific plexus that again relate messages to our physical bodies. Right? So it is a very strong particular type of connection that occurs. And then there's no really technical particularities of it, as Luiz explains. But the next point then is, how does the exteriorization of the vital centers happen? Now, one of the interesting aspects about the vital centers, how do they exteriorize themselves, because again, this is a very strong connection between the physical body and the spiritual body, and of course the spirit, which is the core of all this existence. So Andreas explains that associating the magnetic knowledge, knowledge about the magnetism that is part of the living beings, the living body, the spiritual sublimation, which is the evolution of the spirit. The incarnated scientists, hey, here we are, right? We're talking about us now, will find this out on their own. Ha! Luiz, thank you very much. I really love that. Because again, it puts the responsibility on us. So go figure it out. You guys have the tools to do it. As they have already attained precious knowledge regarding memory regression. Yeah, that's true. Now we know a lot more about it. And the exteriorization of sensibilities, right? So now in Spiritism, we have a lot of help because if you go through all the way from Kardec, which is the core of all the knowledge that we're discussing here today, we already know that the vital centers are this very complex system of connection between our body and our spiritual body, and obviously our spirit. But if you think about how they exteriorize themselves, then medicine helps because it can connect those centers to specific areas in our body that are important in specific organ systems. We certainly have a lot more to learn about it, and I think that's that's the message here. But what we can tell without going through details of what is here, there, what binds here, what goes there, it's very important to tell you one thing, that every one of those vital centers is important in our existence because the energy flows all around us, in and out, through those vital centers. So again, I'll go back to the same story. If what you're thinking right now is not as positive as you imagine, or you're still connected to the same old roots of the selfishness and all those things that anchor us in the world of matter that we've lived for such a long time, it's certainly guaranteed that those vital centers will be vibrating in ways that are not really evolved or designed. They will be showing or exteriorizing exactly what is inside you, what your thoughts, who we are, right? So if you look inside yourself, you'll be able to tell a lot about how your vital centers are in any given time, because they're really a manifestation of who we are as spirits. Okay, let's continue. Now, the next point is quite interesting because it relates to a lot of anatomy and medicine and spiritism. That's something that I'm always interested to talk about. So, what is the importance of the relationship between the spleen and the spleen vital center? So, the vital center that correlates with the area of the spleen. If the spleen can be removed without greater consequences in the existence of the incarnated being, it's a very valid point, right? So what is the spleen? Spleen is an organ that's primarily responsible for filtration of old red blood cells. It looks like a very, very large lymph node in general, and has many capillaries that can clean out a lot of old cells, dead cells, inflammatory cells, and also is important in recognizing some particular type of foreign individuals that are living inside our systems, right? So it's part of our immune system response too. It can also save some blood in cases where we need some extra blood. It can squeeze out some extra red blood cells. But we can live very well without a spleen, and particularly because those functions can be compensated by many other organs. Now, what happens if you think about a vital center just connecting to your body where exactly that organ is? So the answer is not as complicated as you think, because that's what Andrea Luiz will say, that let us understand that the removal of a spleen from the physical body does not remove that same type of system in the spiritual body. So the spiritual body is still intact, although there's that loss of that connection, but the spiritual body not necessarily will lose that function too. Its interconnection to other sources of blood formation in the hematopoietic system. So hematopoiesis means the formation of blood cells, could be white or red blood cells. Poiesis is just the mechanism of formation of blood, basically. Continues functioning, in other words, continue to occur, though imperfectly. So obviously, the body is not doing exactly the same without a spleen, but will survive really well. So responding to the binary articulations of mind and body. So what is it telling here is that in the case of a spleen or the splenic center, it doesn't really matter whether the spleen is there or not. It really matters more of the articulations between mind and body. So what are you thinking? Again, we're going back to the thoughts. We're going back to who we are in the end. Okay? So very, very interesting points there. And now we go to the last one. And I know I'll be talking a lot about many different things, and I'm going to bring another completely different topic. So this chapter, as you probably know by now, in the Evolution to Worlds, interconnects this incredibly complex network of topics that are all throughout the book. So we really need this type of systematic approach to every chapter, going back and forth to understand better, what are we talking about today? So this is the question. So how could we understand the situation of the vital centers in the case of the ovoids? Obviously, first of all, we need to figure out what's ovoid, right? And I think one of the best descriptions and examples of it is in the chapter 6 and chapter 7 of the book Liberation by Andrea Luiz, where when Andrea Luiz is visiting one of the cities that are located down like the deep areas of the umbrals of the planet Earth, he finds this very particular type of existence, which does not have a specific shape. It has a rounded shape. He compares it about to the size of a skull, like a human head. But within that individual that does not have a particular shape, that's why they call it ovoid, there is all experiences and lives and feelings and anxieties and thoughts that are recycling around that matter, but there's no shape. So there's no really spiritual body shape to that. And the mentors on the book will explain to us that in reality, what's happening is that, we can lose our spiritual body. We can lose it, for example, when we reach such a state of evolution that there's really no aggregation of matter around the spirit anymore. the spirit is such a level of evolution that it is existence. It's detached from the matter as we understand in the universe. And you know, we may know one of those. As you can probably think about, imagine Jesus incarnated on earth, how difficult it was to incarnate in a body and aggregate this dense matter from earth around such an incredible spirit to incarnate here. So that talks about the incredible opportunity we had to learn from Jesus as a spirit incarnated in this planet. But again, this is another topic. But now the other way we can find um, uh, um, dramatic changes in the spiritual body will be the opposite. Is that when the spirit is such a state of despair and vengeance and fixed ideas and thoughts that are circling around to a point that the mind cannot even project itself as a spiritual body anymore. Remember that the thoughts control everything, right? In the spiritual body, same thing. So now think about a mind or a spirit in this sense that is so engaged in a self-destructive thought that it would look like it. So that's an ovoid. It loses even the most primary system of recognition, which is the shape of the perispiritual body. And then Andrea Luiz will say, like, you will easily understand the status of the vital centers in the spiritual body restricted in a process of ovoidization or ovoid transformation, although you do not have a specific terminology to express it. By thinking of the organogenic formation of the organs, organogenic principles enclosed into a small seed that will become a tree in the future. So the ovoid is so restricted in a state of this self-destructive cycles of ideas that all the existence of that spirit and perispiritual body is restricted to this shapeless form of existence. But everything's there. Or do you think things will disappear? It's not, right? So it means that when you look at an ovoid in the book like Liberation, for example, obviously we can learn from it as understanding that that's a very dramatic and painful existence that a spirit will have to go through. But at the same time, God is so amazing because it tells us, listen, even in that, everything's there. They'll get there. They'll get out of it. No worries. Right? All of us do. Go back to the seed. Remember, everything is within us. Right? We are these co-creators of the universe. We have a capability. We can move mountains, don't we? But we don't think about it. Or maybe I would say we should think about it. Oh, Marco, but this is too hard. I know. Believe me, we've been through worse. And there's a lot waiting. So let's get going. It's like you going through a challenging time. All of us do, right? Think about it. So this book, take Andrea Luiz and digest it so you can get this little seeds of light that you can take in and make a difference. Marco, are we really talking about the effects of gravitational fields in burst periods? No, we're not talking about that. We could, but that's not the point. And Andrea Luiz is very clear in this whole chapter. The point is, again, who is controlling all this? Who are we? Are we this matter? Are we this my hand? Is this Marco? No. Marco is in here. And this body is just allowing me to leave this existence Take that little seed, put some water on it, make it grow. Is it hard? Hard is not the right word. Requires a lot of work. Yes, it does. Thank God it does. Right? Thank God it does. Because that's how we learn. That's how we learn. Okay. So this is what we had to talk about today in this incredible chapter. I would like to thank all of you for your participation, obviously for being here this late, talking about Andrea Luiz and, you know, so many interesting things, right? Um, so now I'll just go through some of the questions that I may have a chance to go through, right? So let's go through here. Um, so are you saying that vital centers have, ovoids have vital centers too? Of course they do. Now, but how can we quantify and recognize them? That's a difficult question. We can't really tell, right? I know it's in there. Everything that constitutes a human, an individual, is there. It's just that the way they exteriorize itself obviously is compromised because they don't have the same constitution that we have. The organization of the system is all changed, right? So, I mean, that is something that's very, very important, and I think that's a very good point. So they do, but as Andrea Luiz says, we lacked the technical aspects to describe it, right? Um, so, in other words, in simple terms, how the vital centers get exteriorized. So, the vital centers are really fulcrums of energy that circulate between. It's a combination of the energy that's generated by every single one of our individual cells and the and the perispirit or the spiritual body, generating this complex cycle of energy that exteriorizes itself as a fulcrum in specific parts of the body. So, in other words, the connection, right? So, how would it exteriorize itself? Simply think about, as we think about a magnet. Think about a magnet. Let's put like a little magnet, right? So the magnet has two poles, a positive and a negative, right? In one of the poles of the magnet, the energy of the magnet will circulate around that pole on one side and the pole on the other side, right? So if you touch two poles that are they're not coincident with each other, they'll repel itself, right? Because they have these fulcrums of energy that circulate through those specific spots. If the energy is correct, they'll attract each other, and the energy circulates around the pot. So in our body is the same thing. In particular organ systems that we have, that energy will circulate through perispirit and physical body, connecting them through that particular site, and that's how they get exteriorized. Okay, so I'll see more questions here. Let's see if I can go through. Oh, aerobuses. Yes. So the aerobuses are more easy to move around. Oh, yes, of course. Particularly if we still, in our minds, need that type. So think about this. So when we think about spiritual cities, the spiritual cities that we have reports from are actually spiritual cities that are very close to our earthly existence, right? Which means that, again, the same way Andrea Luiz is talking about here, think about the possibilities. So get yourself out of your caterpillar stage and think about you as a little butterfly. Look, what is the possibility, the end spectrum, right? So we're very close. So you're here, Nocelar is here, right? And what's here? I don't know. What's here? I have no idea. What's there? I don't know. Do we need an Airbus to move over there? Probably not, right? Because when we get there, our thoughts are going to be really what drives us. So we think we're there. And when we reach a stage closer to a perfect, to a spirit like Jesus, for example, he's pretty much everywhere all the time because his thought is so encompassing of the universe that he can be present to each one of us. So he does not need a little tuk tuk to move around. Okay? It depends how dense our perispirit is, how connected to matter we are, and what we have in our minds. Okay, so that is the answer to that question. Let's see if I have more questions here. Let's think about it. Yep, that's okay. Yeah, I hope that helps all. That's it. Yeah. So I got some rainbows here. I think that's good. We got some rainbows. All right. So that's it, guys. So thank you very much. I'm running out of time here. Vanessa's going to be upset with me because I'm already 5 minutes over. Thank you all. And I'll be with you guys again soon to talk about um, other chapters. And I hope you guys enjoyed this. And all the best to all of you guys. May God bless each one of us. Thank you.